Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a great lunch. We've got a wonderful afternoon ahead of us. Starting with a presenter who I had the privilege of seeing in Freiburg, Germany last year. Yesenia gave this talk, and I think I immediately sent an email to Steve, who organizes the Velocity Conference, saying that this is the best talk that I've ever seen, sort of talking about performance from a design perspective. And I am incredibly jealous of the way that she frames conversations around design and performance. So please join me in welcoming Yesenia.
Hey. Hi, everyone. So this morning has been fantastic, and a lot of maybe the secondary theme of a lot of the talks this morning have been around performance. And now we're going to get into a chunk of time where we're talking about performance, and I'm going to specifically be talking about design through the lens of performance. So my name's Yesenia Perez Cruz. I'm currently a senior product designer at Vox Media, which is a technology and media company that publishes publications like The Verge, Vox, and Polygon. And then before that, I was on the agency side, working with clients like Papa John's and Trek Bikes to deliver great user experiences to their clients. Last week, the big news on the web was all about these ad blockers that you could currently download with iOS 9. And they promise things like, we're going to browse faster, and we're going to have fast and clutter-free experiences. And as someone that uses the web and is trying to get something done, maybe when I'm outside and I have a slow connection, I totally get the frustration. But as someone who works on the web, I went to one of these content blocker sites, and they actually said, we're going to make the web great again, and put the control back in the user's hands by almost building a wall between the good content and the bad content. And that kind of troubles me. I think Eric Meyer summarized, I'm Team Eric here, he summarized the problem really well, that this isn't a problem with just ads. The problem is generally with careless web development. Like, we can be smart about the way we use web fonts and load advertising. We have been careless. I don't need to convince you that experiencing and browsing the web on your phone can be tedious, can be very slow. And Sophie did a fantastic job of explaining why we need to care about global audiences and why we need to care about a variety of connection speeds. And I think, we're all aware of this, we're talking about it, but the average site of websites keeps growing. So as a designer, sometimes, or initially when I started thinking about this, designing for performance, it felt like it was this debate between creating something fast, functional, and lightweight versus creating something that was memorable and beautiful and on brand. But what I've found is that we shouldn't be thinking about designing for performance as this battle between beauty and function. And instead, we need to think about what's going to be an overall better user experience. So a couple weeks ago, I was shopping for a new office chair. And I spent about a week debating if I should choose a chair that was more attractive, that would look great in Instagram pictures, or it's reality, or a comfortable, ergonomic, but ugly chair. And, sure, the chair on the left is more aesthetically pleasing, but overall, the chair on the right is going to be a better user experience, because I'm going to be more comfortable sitting in it, and it's going to make me happier. And I'm not saying we need to make websites that look like my ugly office chair, but I do think we need to consider what's going to be an overall better user experience. And the reality is that fast sites build trust, and what brand doesn't want to be trustworthy? And fast sites are memorable. People are going to remember the impression that they had when they went to your site and they had a really zippy, pleasant experience. So we need to consider that performance is a design feature and not just this technical concern. And we need to talk about our projects in that way, and we need to build it as a goal into all of our projects. So designing for performance for me meant that I had to change a little bit about my workflow. And there's been a couple kind of key factors to that. The first was designing really deliberately, designing with purpose. Brad touched on this, making sure that every single decision that I make about what's going to be on a web page, I put a lot of care into it, and I understand how is this going to benefit users or how is this going to benefit a business goal, but I'm really being deliberate. But it's really tough to be deliberate unless I have some constraints that I can work within. So a performance budget is something that can help me and my team stay on track and make sure that we're sticking to our goal here. And then the last one is straightforward, but it's kind of the most important. I'm communicating. I have sometimes designed sites that were incredibly heavy, not knowing the implications of the decisions that I was making. So when I'm talking to the developers on my team, I'm asking them, am I making any decisions that are going to impact performance on the design negatively? So that's really key. So performance budgets have really been helpful in framing discussions about design and performance. They're this tangible way to talk about performance, and they help us decide how to include what in a design. And what I really like about them is they make everyone on the project prioritize. So they create this balance. If a client or someone on my team or I want to add something to a design, we have to understand that that's going to, require maybe removing something or optimizing something, and we're having these discussions. There's different types of performance budgets, so they can be based on a browser's experience, and you can say that we want our pages to weigh no more than 400 kilobytes and make no more than 15 requests, or they can be based on a user's experience, so our pages should take no more than 10 seconds to load over a sub 3G connection. And then once you have your performance budget set, you can really use it to frame your decisions. So if I have my budget and I decide that I want to add these high-resolution images to the design, but that's going to take us over budget, then we have to figure out, all right, what are we going to do to stick back within our budget? And we may need to remove something or optimize something, or we may not be able to add the images if it's going to take us over budget. Web page test is a fantastic tool for starting to put together a performance budget. And you can take a look at things like the page weight and the start render time, so that the first point that someone sees something on a screen when it's fully loaded. And start from there. You can evaluate what kind of budget you want to set. The other benefit that web page test has, which I think is really great, is it lets you compare how you're doing against competitors. And it outputs it in this timeline view or in a video view, which I think is really powerful, that you can actually visualize how maybe your site or your competitors are taking a lot longer. And the other thing about performance budgets is they can be even smaller. So I could say, of my budget, I want to carve out this amount for web fonts. And I think that typography is one of the most important things that we need to consider and get right when it comes to both design and performance. It is one of the most important ways that we can communicate our content. It is one of the most important ways that we can communicate a mood or an emotion. And it also can block rendering on a site, and it can also load a lot of assets on a site. So it's really important just all around. So my philosophy for developing a typographic palette and keeping in mind performance is to find ways to do more with less. And when I'm evaluating typefaces, I have a couple of requirements. So the first one is emotion. Does this convey the right mood? And then the other one is function. So this is all about content and the way the forms of the letter forms are helping shape my content. And then the performance implications. How much does this combined type kit weigh? So if I have a mood that I want to set with my typography, I can list that out. And then I can be looking for typefaces that fit that mood. Then I think about my content. And let's say that a big part of my content strategy is to rely on statistics to tell a story. Then a lot of my search will rely on finding typefaces that have really strong numerals. And then I may want something that has a very strong headline and a legible body copy. So I'm just collecting requirements while I'm evaluating my typefaces. And then the last one is setting my type performance budget. So, with all of those requirements set, I have some really good constraints that I can work within. A lot of times when people are talking about either designing with performance or responsive design, they'll say, oh, responsive design has no soul. There's too many constraints. Why are you holding me back? And I feel like being really smart about what constraints I set and what I want to communicate helps me. It gives me so much room to explore once I have those parameters. So it really doesn't lock me down at all. So with those requirements in place, I'm free to do some exploring. And I can do some side-by-side comparisons of different letter forms and compare the headings and see which one feels, stronger or more powerful and find which communicates the right emotion. And then I can take a look at the numbers and see what kind of font pairing is going to give me the most range with the numbers. And then once I have my explorations resolved, I can start to calculate the cost of these fonts. So let's say I have a direction, and I can calculate, I'm going to need this heading type, and I'm going to need an italic for emphasis. I'm going to need a secondary font in those 3 weights. And then in this case, I'm going to go with a system font for the body copy. And I can calculate what kind of performance cost that's going to be. And I can do the same thing. And then I can, weigh the consequences. Do I want to go with a heavier kit? Maybe, if that's really important, if that personality is really important. Or maybe I want to go with something lightweight, or maybe I need to optimize what I've selected. But it helps me to think about being performant with my typography from the very beginning. So now I think a couple years ago, I worked with a company, and they're a pizza delivery chain, and they had just undergone a new branding exercise. And they gave it to us after we had set our baseline performance budget. But the problem with the typography was I knew it wasn't going to translate very well to the web. I don't know if you can tell from here, but every other letter is a different font, which, that can work on a print flyer or on a poster, but it wasn't going to work on the web. So again, I talked to my developers and I asked them, we've set this budget for the overall site, but how much should I spend on web fonts? And when they gave me an estimate, I could go back to my client and say, all right, we're going to make this work, but you have this much to spend on web fonts. And do you want to go with option A, which is 3 weights of Whitney and 1 weight of Knockout for the body copy? Or do we want to try to, have more of that poster feel and go with 3 weights of Knockout for the headings, and then we'll use system fonts for the body copy? And then we talked about it. We asked, what is a better translation of your brand? And I think that, these conversations are really important, especially when we're talking about finding that balance between beauty and function and performance and design, because, we can strike that balance. We just need to be really smart and deliberate with how we do it. And then the other thing with typography is choosing fallback fonts. Again, Peace has already been removed from the App Store, but last week, Jen Simmons tweeted that, this is a reminder that people on iOS 9 can now block the loading of all your web fonts, so make sure your sites look great anyway. And I think that's a really great reminder that we need to put as much care into our fallback fonts as we do our regular typography systems. Let's not take web fonts for granted. They could fail, someone could block them. So let's say I have my type system. I can compare my heading styles with what's currently available by default on iOS. And I can do the same with Android. So maybe I'll decide that Roboto Black and Roboto Condensed Black are good substitutes for Android. And I could set my font stack that way. So it's not this perfect match, but it's still considered. And it seems like it's been deliberately designed. So I think that Brad and Sophie and a lot of people have done a great job at selling the idea of pattern libraries. So I'm not going to sell why pattern libraries are valuable. But I am going to talk about how I actually approach working with them. because I know there were some questions about, how do you go from a comp to patterns and back? So again, my philosophy is don't add a style that you don't need. And when I worked on a newspaper site a couple years ago, the main goal was to get the news to mobile users quickly. So, but we had some of the same challenges that you have with any kind of publication. The site was asset heavy and it was full of ads. So for this project, the core page of the site was an article. So I actually designed a mobile comp for an article and a desktop to explore brand and to have conversations about, what our system is going to look like when it's all together. Once I have that and I have a good kind of baseline about what I want the site to look like, then I can start to identify what these patterns are. And I can take a look at my heading styles and I can say, these are the heading styles. This is the color palette, and I can start to assign meaning to it. And then I could extract the key components. So for this site specifically, a lot of what I did was identifying key content blocks and then building upon them and iterating on them. So the one on the left is just a story snippet, but if the story's live, it has a little live flag. And if the story's sponsored, then it gets a background color change. And this is subtle, but I think that a couple years ago when I wasn't considering performance in my design, I may have made that live block much more different, much more varied, or I may have made the sponsored one much more different. But in this case, I was really purposeful with my variations and kind of deciding what is the minimum amount of design that I need to differentiate this. And then the other key is to be editing constantly while you're designing. So this has been something that I've been doing for years, but if I am working on comps or if I'm working on, there's designs in the browser, I will randomly take screenshots of some of the key modules and I'll put them side by side and I'll compare them against each other. Because when everything's extracted, it can be hard to see redundancies, but when you're looking at modules side by side, you can really compare why do I have slightly different heading styles? Is that purposeful? Does that make sense? Can I consolidate it? So it's really helpful just to do that every now and then while you're designing. And then the other benefit to designing modularly is you have these little components and you can get them into design earlier. So I like to have estimates of what a performance impact could be while I'm designing, while I'm still looking at something static, but you really can't tell how something is going to work until you're actually looking at it on a device. So designing modularly helps us do that. And then, I can talk to the developers on my team and we can start to have conversations about, how we can make things more efficient or make things more speedy. And that may mean that I need to change something in the design. But since I've been working, modularly, it's not a huge issue. So this was another example from that newspaper site. And once we had some rough comps, the developer on my team actually mocked up, what would be the difference between going with an adaptive approach with our navigation versus just responsive, and what is going to perform better. So these are the types of discussions that we can have when we're designing modularly and kind of blending our workflows. So, don't be reckless. Be really deliberate with your decisions when you're designing. And, remember that this isn't a fight between beauty and function. You don't have to think about it as sacrificing beauty at the expense of function. Really think about creating beautiful user experiences. Thank you.